We have reached the end of 2025, and it is that time of year where we look back, we either give thanks or we curse the things that we've seen over this incredibly long year of rugby union. So, as is now tradition, I'm going to do that in the company of my. Are we colleagues now? Are you my colleague?
Hey, Hugh. We're colleagues. We're brothers in arms. We navigate the tricky waters of the MVA universe called Megaphone, which is increasingly populated by more and more colleagues and brothers in arms. I think we're part of an actual army.
Yeah. Well, when we went to Twickenham, our names were on plaques next to each other. They're
You,
from the same company.
you used to be a pirate, and now I think you've become institutional.
I'm a privateer. I've been given a, what do they call it? I've been given a thingy by the king that says you can carry on being a pirate, but you're not allowed to hunt my ships. You are only allowed to hunt the enemy ships. So that's
Yes,
how it works.
there's a great series of books. It's Jack Aubrey and Patrick Maturin where they're able to do that. You know, where the Buccaneers are so pernicious that then the Crown just goes, well, what if our guys can sort of be semi-pirates? So this maybe that's what you are. You're a hybrid, like a big lock flank, a 12, Esterhazen. You've become the hybrid. You're both a rebel, a rogue, but you've also made your way into the empire.
But then, what are you? Are you a missionary? Are you a traveler? Are you a salesman going from town to town? Are you running toward or running away? That's always my question. I've always wondered about you.
I'm a voice from long ago that tells you what will happen next.
Right, okay. Okay. Well, it's been a big year for you. We're going to review 2025, and we're going to go through the biggest narratives of 2025 in rugby union. But for you, Harry, it's been a hell of a year. This has got to be your best year doing this, if not your best year, full stop.
Yeah, it's funny because there's lulls that are you know how like rugby always seems to come back to the mean, and whatever you think will change ends up not changing. And so one of those things has always been the Springboks will fade in the middle of these what we call cycles nowadays. Sorry, but it's just what we call them, and it's just like clockwork. And for some reason this year, even though all the things were set up to do that again, it didn't happen. So I suppose that's something to celebrate. And it's almost like being born in a household where everything goes wrong. Like maybe you have a very dysfunctional family. You just keep waiting for something bad to happen, and it just never happened. So yeah, I think it's good around Christmas to look back and get your pudding and find the coin or whatever it is your tradition is, and just enjoy it. I cannot think of anything really bad except Ellis Park for the Bok fan, and even that became so ludicrous that it's almost become the stuff of legends.
Yeah, you can always laugh about it now. The what was it? The hundkak that Enver won't let me say on his show because apparently he doesn't like that word.
Envy does
Um,
not like Envy does not like saying cuck. But the thing is that all English South Africans say cuck all the time because it's almost like when you're swearing in another person's language, it never seems quite so bad. MV, the best he will do will be K and then another letter and then K. He won't say the A in the middle. But yeah, like if you like, you can use cock in such a beautiful sense. It's like one of the most malleable words. You can insert cock almost everywhere, and you can say you think cock, you talk cock, you're cocker than that. It's just a cock fest. I mean, you can just keep going, and it's also extremely emotionally satisfying to say the word.
I find some Afrikaans words some very very gratifying to say. Gutful I have found mu
Heartful, yes.
works much better than any English word for that thing.
And it's also good if you can teach your friends wherever you live, Hugh, the beauty of the word "dous." And if you can teach them that it's a bad word, but they don't really know that it's a bad word until they do, then in mixed settings, when you're just in a party or in a nice quiet dinner party, you just come out with "dous" and watch them fall under the table. It's great.
When I went to see the Box versus France at the Women's World Cup, I was saying to Enver said, you need to wear your Bulls top. So I wore my Bulls top. And I said, Enver, what do I do? Because what if there's lots of South Africans here? What if one comes over and tries to speak Afrikaans to me? And the only South African words, the only Afrikaans words that I know are donkey, cock, and doos. And uh, Enver was like, just don't use any of those. Don't.
Dankie vir die kak, Doos, oom Doos. Yeah, this is good. I think you have the makings of pretty much what you need. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can get across
Those
it.
three words will take you really far in Potchefstroom. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. So let's talk about narratives of 2025. So you're someone who has spoken about rugby for this entire year. So what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say what's something that you have spoken most about in 2025 when discussing rugby?
Probably the first thing would be the scrums. I think what's interesting is the beginning of the year, we feared that the weaker scrums would be saved to such an extent that it would cut at the fabric of what a scrum is. And the arguments that would be used against that would be facetious. For example, they would say, well, we're not saying that you shouldn't, the stronger scrum shouldn't be rewarded. We're just saying that good, clean ball is enough of a reward. Or they were saying, originally, you weren't supposed to be pinged for just being a weaker scrum or just breaking up and being, fractured. It was, you have to do some specific definable offense against the scrum to be pinged. And a successful scrum is really just the beautiful ball you get and the tied together forwards. And they would leave out the fact that because scrums have gone from 22, 23 a game down to between 6 and 12, in some cases, some games 3 or 4, it's possible because of advantages, better ball handling, and referee, whatever. So they leave out the fact that to keep it vital and as important as picking for a line out or picking for rock cleaning, you had to have a higher percentage of scrums be pinged to make up for the denominator going down, and then you would be able to still reward a stronger scrum. Else you would have teams picked with Lavani Botia as a front rower, and it wouldn't really matter. You could always escape. You could free kick yourself if you needed to, or you could just do route one. And so that was the fear going into 2025. A funny thing happened on the way to the end of 2025, and that you had some of the most scrum-centric matches in history, including the Ireland test with the Boks. It was almost absurd, where the principle of that was fought for by the champions of the scrum, by third string Bok props saying, we defend the right of the scrum against these heretics. We believe in the one true religion of scrum, and we will force that issue in a decisive council, of the bishops or something. We will make it so. And along the way, what's interesting is there were such decisive scrums in the Rugby Championship that were tight heads against the feed, which were, it's bizarre that you can lose when you can put it under the foot of the flank, it's almost bizarre that you could ever lose that. So I think maybe the rumors of the demise of the scrum were exaggerated.
Yes, I think the stats now that it's kind of become, or I don't know whether it's become irrelevant over 2025 or I've just learned that it is irrelevant, is the 100% scrum success.
Yeah.
It means nothing. Like Australia, I think, had 100% scrum success. I think Brett was saying that Australia had 100 scrums in 2025 and lost one, something on their own feed, which is just a ludicrous stat. And we were talking earlier in the year about in Super Rugby how these Australian teams in Super Rugby had 100% scrum completion rate, and it's a nonsense. What is going on there is the scrum is being protected. That a referee is making a non-decision in order to preserve play, which is what they've been told to do, which is the sign that has come down from above. But like the stat that I'll give you is that in the November Test series, Wales did not win a scrum against the head until they played the Springboks, and they won a scrum against the head against the Springboks in the first half. Why? Because the Springboks went for a penalty, the ref interpreted it a certain way and went against the Springboks and gave the scrum all the free kick to Wales. And that's that trade-off of, if you want to be an aggressive scrummaging team where you go out to win penalties with your scrum, because there's an advantage that you get from doing that, clearly, then you're going to introduce a variable into the conversation, which is the referee. You're going to force the referee to make a decision, and he might not make the one that you like. And I think there's something that I've heard you talk about a lot is the fundamental ideological difference between those who see the scrum as rugby and those who see the scrum as the precursor to rugby. And
Yes.
that's, I think, where the ultimate dissatisfaction comes. And I will say that I do think that that Ireland test really took that to the limit in terms of, is this the, I like a scrum as much as the next man, but this is starting to feel like not a rugby match anymore.
It's funny. So I think when you're judging a scrum, like the portfolio in your team is the scrum, and you sit down with your coach and you want to say what happened this year, you're not going to fixate on my put-ins. How many of those that did not end in a penalty ended in a ball playable? Because now you're just saying, did anyone get a tight end against us almost? It's a meaningless stat, like you say. What you would do is say, on the plus minus of penalties resulting from scrums on my put in or your put in, were we a penalty harvesting scrum? And to what extent did we get pinged for our scrums? Because it's almost like in tennis, if you go for an ace on your first serve, you're going to have more faults. And then if you go 90% of your second serve, you're also going to have more double faults. But if you're a good server, the going 100% then 90 instead of 90 and then 85 or 75, you'll have more double faults, but you have a lot more aces, a lot more service winners. And so that's the way you judge sort of the Stormer scrum right now is reaping a lot of scrum penalties. They're also going to therefore concomitantly, I think, or nogal, they're going to get penalties against them because they're putting themselves into the hands of the referee to call what a hinge is or going around and so forth. That's philosophical, and some teams are going for it, and some teams are just saying, let's just start the play again because we believe our strengths are in phase play.
Yeah. Which again, we could go off on a tangent here because I don't know if you've seen, but the Optus Stats Hub is back up, and the Stormers stats in particular are absolutely fascinating, and we could go off an massive tangent here about that. But yeah, it's one of those scrum. And the other thing about scrum stats that I don't like is that it's all on your own put-in. So you have 100% success on your own put-in, which again, going back to the Australia one is, yeah, the referee protected us on our own put-in, and then on the opposition put-in, we just got absolutely shoved backwards every single time. But the stats say we were 100% successful, so that's one of those. Okay, so good opener for a narrative of 2025 so far. My first one, what that I found myself talking about a lot and drawn to, is because I like to talk about Tier 2 rugby a lot. Something that came up constantly throughout the whole year was the contrasts and the kind of flipped narratives, the opposing narratives between the two hemispheres of America and between the contrasting fortunes of North American rugby and South American rugby, where South American rugby through Super Rugby Americas, through the growth in Uruguay and Chile, and the continuation of Felipe Contepone's Los Pumas team, which is the best Los Pumas team certainly that I can remember watching. The contrast between that and the continued struggles between the US men's Eagles, between the Canadian team, which continues to flounder. And yet, in the eyes of some people, World Rugby continuing to push and reward USA Rugby and not reward South American Rugby, which has rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way, has caused a lot of anger, and has caused, naturally, a lot of defensiveness from fans of North American rugby saying, whoa, don't hate us. We're doing our best over here, and there's a reason why World Rugby wants us to succeed. You're obviously joining me from Texas right now, mate. What's your take on the contrasts between the success of rugby in South America and the continued struggles in North America?
That's such a good topic. And it involves sociology and the way in which sports are played by young people in these various countries. So you take Argentina and you take the US as your best major comparison points. And there's a lot of study about that in the cultures. I mean, Chicago in 1900 and Buenos Aires in 1900 were basically the same city. And no one could have predicted the next 100 years that Argentina would be seen as sort of a basket case of inflationary policies and junta regimes, and that it would stagnate and you'd have Uber drivers going on fire. Nor would you have said that this brash, unschooled, uncivilized country called America would have vaulted up to be the inheritor of Britain as the global, solver of peace. So take that as a sort of that in 1900 people played rugby in America. They won the Olympic gold. Rugby was an Ivy League sport, but it also was a sport for Northwestern in Chicago. And there are clubs that have been existent in Chicago for that whole time. Similarly, Argentina was sort of spawned by the sort of overseas expat British thing, and then supported by South Africa and the French at times to become a thing that was mostly club orientated. Nothing in America gets done in sports, though, from 1930s on, unless it's in schools. It's got to be in schools or it doesn't exist. There is no significant club post-school culture like the French have, which Argentines have. As rugby then stymied itself by not being in those schools, and every new school that opened in America as it went westward and the population went more westward, it just didn't, rugby was not part of the curriculum. So what happened next is, and it's the shining light and why World Rugby's made this bet, is you can still, even 3% of Chicago, if it becomes in love with rugby, is enough to support a professional sports team. And if Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, Miami, LA all have that same phenomenon of a 3% of the market, it's like women's soccer in America. It's number 1 or 2 in the world. The population of Wales is exceeded by Chicago. So you have plenty of money, right? So everyone they can pay up, they can buy the merch, and they don't mind paying $200 for a ticket. They never complain. So that's the dream. Also, you have the sponsors in America that Argentina doesn't have. So like you say, why would I put a World Cup in a place where it's not beloved instead of a place that's been so loyal to rugby, Argentina, Salta, Mendoza, these wonderful, Rosario, like wonderful places? It's because there's no jack there, there's no cheese. So you couldn't lure maybe, a badass sponsor the way you could if you were in the US. So just having it there attracts a percentage of people, 3, 4, 5%, just like the Women's World Cup soccer thing did with Brandy Chastain. And then from that point on, it was a juggernaut. That's the model they're trying to go. And so what they did is college sports has exploded in rugby. Women's rugby has exploded. It is the highest growth because in US, you have to equalize every dollar you spend on a man in college. By Title IX, you have to spend the same on a woman. You cannot play American football. It doesn't work for women. It just doesn't. I'm not trying to say anything contentious here. Rugby does. And so that what they've done is rugby is growing to equalize the numbers they spend on men's college football, American football. That's the long-term bet. It's more on the women than it is the men in the US. That's the thing to understand. As far as the results in the field, putrid. Not good. MLR struggling. But there's that thing where they say it doesn't really matter because an event works on Americans' brains, especially if it's a big thing and there's enough star power and Shaquille O'Neal is there and it just gets that 3 or 4%. And that's all you need from a town like Dallas or LA. I mean, ice hockey thrives in hot weather cities because you just need 3 or 4% of the city and it's fine.
Yeah. So a couple of things to touch on there that you mentioned. Firstly, with the women's thing, the Ilona Maher effect was such that when World Rugby did a paper, which I read, which was a bit cobbled together from other stuff, to be honest, but they did a paper about the blueprint for the growth of the women's game, and Ilona Maher got her own whole page, and she was mentioned on the first page, and she was mentioned on several pages. I mean, being someone in America, like she was unavoidable for anyone who was in the women's rugby space. What do you think of that as a strategy, putting everything just on the shoulders of this one player?
Or someone like her. So yes, the cult of personality is very strong in a suffused work market where everyone's just entertained at all times. And if you stop being entertained for 1 second, you die. It's like the American brain is on, crack. So there's never enough. It's 24 hours. There are niches. There are people who just love UFC and can pour into it. Esports can draw 2 million people to an event over a course of a week. You just hard to get your mind around 350 million lonely, hungry people with lots of money who want to have violence and fun. Like, I don't know. It's just imagine Hunger Games and the capital, except it's like 350 million people. So I understand the play here, and I understand the skepticism of people saying, "But where's the thing?" And it doesn't take much of a. It doesn't take very many Ilonas. It doesn't take very many forms of life in some planet somewhere to suddenly have animal life and consciousness of materials. So, you've got to first have the thing. So the thing is put a big event. Americans are event orientated people. Then you got to have, the impresario, the circus effect. And someone's going to come forward, whether it's Brandy Chastain ripping off her shirt and her sports bra, or it's Ilona, or it's something else. And so the men's game is still waiting for that. America is particularly suited to create good rugby players. It's not like you have to watch the genetics too far to know that you could have it. The long-term effect is going to be at high school level. If you can get high schoolers to choose rugby over basketball or soccer or football, the best athletes, enough of those, then you've got what you need. Right now, it's still very niche. I would say that percentage of people who know who's who and what's what, All Black, Springboks, probably recognizable, but beyond that, no. It's like 1%, less than 1%.
Yeah. And I know you've worked a little bit in MLR with MLR teams. You've had your ear to the ground there, chastening a couple of years for that competition. What's your gut feel about that moving forward?
I'm split between abject pessimism and sober optimism. The optimism comes from the fact that they're not allowing things to develop and go and hiding bad balance sheets so that they end up being like the Wasps or London Welsh. So that won't happen, which is terrible I think it's almost worse to let someone go too long and have, people flouting the rules. Like you have to make the balance sheet work. If you don't, then they let you resign basically, but they would have cut you anyway. Pessimism comes from is there enough people? Are there enough people coming through from 16-year-old, 17-year-old, talented identification pathways, getting stuck in to create a team and an environment that can handle the travel? So the travel is the number one cost that's making a Seattle team go to Miami. It's to put that into perspective for people. That'd be like you flying to Turkey or something. I don't know, maybe Israel. So like it's ridiculous to try to do that inside a competition that's not rich yet, where there's not packed stadiums except for about two places. My gut, it has to happen in colleges, universities, and that's where it'll be. You watch Alabama play Auburn in football, it's 80,000. Michigan versus Ohio State, 100,000 people, game day. They're paid now, so college and universities is professional. But that's where it'll be. That's where the athletes are. That's where the passion is. And it's already developing, so there are rugby rivalries between a college in California versus a neighbor, a derby sort of, and in Chicago area, Denver, hotbed, New England, Washington, D.C., those are hot spots. Inside a place like Texas, they could inherit the rivalry that already exists between Texas and Texas A&M, for example, in rugby, and just feed off of that. That's where it's going to be because of the money. As the women's programs are so rich now, I think it's going to develop a sensibility about rugby. What South America has in such more of an advantage is that rugby is much more of a footballing sport, where kicking is not a failure and not the end, like in league, where you give up and you have to kick. It's the beginning of attack. It's the shape of attack. It's the shape of rugby. It's kick space. And I would say footballers are more hard to find in America than big brutes who can scrum and locks who can jump. That's obvious, easy. And with a massive Pacifica population, it's also easy to find people who will just murder you and understand how to tackle because their uncle and their dad did. The hard part is finding more AJ McGinty's, proper nines, and real fullbacks.
Yeah, Yeah, I completely agree with that. Anyway, we're going to continue with our chat in a minute, but I just want to remind people that if you are enjoying the show so far, please consider subscribing. If you're listening on audio platforms, you can comment on Spotify, or you can follow on Spotify or Apple, or if you're on YouTube, subscribe to the show, leave a comment down below with your thoughts so far, and leave us more thoughts when you've listened further on and you have anything that you'd have to say about what we've said. We don't mind. If you disagree with us, that's okay. We won't be offended. Okay, Harry, what's your second big narrative from 2025 Rugby Union?
I think it's very difficult to skip by a Lions series. So I think when we look back, when it's 4 or 5 years from now and look back on 2025, we will remember the Lions and we will think about it. And in the story inside that story is whither Australia. Like, where are you going? Where are you going, Australia? Are you up or are you down? Have you been Schmidtified? Will it be able to go? Will it be transferable to KISS? How close really was it? What did it tell us about the state of play? And what does it take to get an Australian to go sit in a stadium and watch something? And how ugly was the reaction around that call about the pilfer and the clean? I think all those things sort of combine into a lovely soup of rugby, soupçon. And for me, I have pretty good information about Joe Schmidt and how he saw that, and he's still steaming. Still believes it was a travesty. Um, Cannot believe that he didn't make it. Cannot believe that final play went the wrong way for him in Melbourne. Hasn't looked at it properly yet with an advantage of time. Probably is for Australia. They probably got a little too bitter about that, and they maybe lost some of the good faith and celebratory goodness from that. Um, let's see, but it showed us what's possible in Australia still, like that it's still able to fill a 100,000, whatever that was, at MCG Stadium, and for a week or two or three to have the country, on the front of the back page, be rugby union. Still, how remarkable it is that Australia is good at rugby, feeding off such a tiny percentage, almost like the American dream, actually. It's almost like what they think will happen in America is what's happening in Australia, is a very small percentage of heavy winter athletes go into a rugby union, and not the best ones, and they're still pretty good. So, but I do think there was an ugliness around the reaction, where Joe Schmidt questioned the referee's commitment to safety in his press conference and didn't get spanked for it. And the narrative became too much. We was robbed. The Nigel Owens video, the fixation on one call being the thing that loses or wins the game, when there's a truism there. It could be, but it's not really. Not if you're a coach, not if you're trying to make your team better. Um, I think it was still a captivating series. I think some of the people that emerged from it will forever, whether it's Maro Toje or Ty Byrne, or even that moment of Hugo Keenan, that will live on in fame.
I really struggled to get into the Lions tour, and I wrote and I spoke a lot about this, and I guess you're right. It's mad to think it's still this year, and certainly up in the Northern Hemisphere, it feels like we moved on from it very quickly. It doesn't feel like it was a defining feature of rugby. I think that's partially helped by the fact that, excuse me, that England finished the year so strongly. Is that it kind of the Lions did wasn't kind of England's thing because it was so Irish dominated. It's definitely dominated the conversation around Irish rugby, I would say, about Andy Farrell and the decisions that he made and stuff. I just found it personally, from my own point of view, being a Welsh rugby fan, having only one player in the tour, I didn't feel connected to it. And you can talk about representation does or does it not matter. My kind of counter to that is, well, what does matter when it comes to the Lions? Because it feels at times like the only thing that matters was winning. And the Lions did win, but it wasn't enough.
Because of the Welshman. Jack Morgan was literally the reason why the Lions won.
Yeah, with the clean out. Within like to answer kind of your Schmidt about your point about Joe Schmidt about whether it came down to that. It kind of did and it didn't because
Yeah.
it clearly did. But if I look at it and I go, the Wallabies were nowhere in that first test. No, they weren't even competitive in the first test. And then in the second test, they had that purple patch of however many minutes where the Lions were down to 14 men and they ran in three crazy tries from their own half. And that got them ahead and they nearly hung on to that lead. And then
Right.
they obviously won the dead rubber. So it's a little bit kind of a convenient narrative for me to say that for Joe Schmidt to say, oh, we could have and should have won that series. It's kind of post rationalization for me a little bit.
I agree, but I think it also explains why I feel like the Wallabies caved the rest of the season. They just went into a free fall. I mean, they had Ellis Park, and then from that point on, it just seemed like there was no starch. And my opinion about that is there was a mental sort of hangover from the Lions. They had one bright, shining moment, and then the rest of the tournament they went worse, and then the end of year tour was abysmal. So when we're looking at things we're worried about, and there's America in 2031, I'm worried about Australia as a host in 2027. With even with all of the things to prop them up, I think there's a possibility that they could be fodder for someone again. With Les Kiss taking over, and me having no faith in Les Kiss as an inheritor of the Schmidt system, and no faith in what he's done at the Queensland Reds, that tells me he has the same magic as Joe, and Joe's magic running out. I just worry a bit about whether Australia and always saying Sue Ali will save us. Who's the next Sue Ali? I don't know. I just feel like there's that one hit wonder thing.
Yeah. I mean, we're getting into we're getting into shooting from the hip here, but I do feel like Schmidt has checked out a bit, and I think that it would be wiser to move on and bring in Kiss now than it would be to this nonsense arrangement that they've got of playing the first three tests of next year and then handing over to Kiss. That I think that's going to do so much more harm than good, because there's no way that Joe Schmidt is going to really take what happened this year back to the drawing board and dissect it and analyze it and go through it and rebuild for three games and then hand it over
Yeah,
to someone
I
else. He's
agree.
not going to do that. Like no human would do that. That's it's not just about Joe Schmidt. No one would do that.
Right.
Having said that, the whole fly half situation didn't help him at all. I don't think there was a right answer. I don't think necessarily Schmidt did the wrong thing with who he selected. He picked who he thought was the best guy, and unfortunately, none of them really worked out.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because they vacillated between finding kick space and not. There were tests in which they just didn't kick enough. And there's no way to win in rugby if you try to play from your own 22 too many times. Every fly off would look bad. I don't care who you are. You cannot play from there. And the few moments where you are able to pull that off, like an Argentine move from from nowhere, or some incredible moment by Bowden Barrett, is always counterbalanced by five or six terrible, catastrophic ends to running it out as an exit. So I just think the Wallabies suffered under that lack of clarity. But the whole thing about Australia is then, to me, it's unclear whether anything really did get fixed post Eddie Jones. When you look at the actual numbers of what happened to Australia, it's not quite as a rescue job as it looks. And you have this very, like you say, clunky relay from Eddie to Joe to Les that I'm not sure we've heard the end of the story. I think that he might be the third guy, and there's going to be someone else that comes in to run the final leg before we're in the World Cup. That's my prediction.
Mm, I think that's one. I'm open-minded about Les Kiss, but I think his handover is a mess. Anyway, on to my next narrative. My next biggest narrative. Now, this is not maybe not one that kind of people watching or listening to this podcast might be aware of, but it's something that you are aware of because I've spoken about it with you when we were there. And it is the behind the scenes evolution of the press room in rugby union and the media centres. And when you go to these big matches, who is sat in the front row of the press conferences. And it's not the people with the journalism degrees who have got years of writing for broadsheets, in their back pocket and things like this. You know, that you could talk about the rise of AI and how I have very much noticed articles that are definitely written by AI creeping into rugby now. We have heard the stories of news companies cutting their sports desks and the number of journalists actually being sent abroad to cover test matches being slashed, and how these independent creators, such as yourself and myself, now self-funding to go to these things for the love of it, is now starting to feel like to me a very tangible shift behind the scenes in the coverage of rugby union. What say you?
No, I agree, and I think it was imperceptible when the shift happened, but now we know it has. So we can go back and be archaeologists and try to figure out where it happened. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's here, like you say. Stormers just asked me to be embedded with him in a Champions Cup, kind of a nothing game in some ways, but also incredible for me as a boy who grew up just Western Province age representative, trying to get to the next level. Didn't exist at the time. There was no Stormers, but like a dream come true, like a bucket list. And I was trying to figure out why they would do that. So why give that place to me instead of a Cape Argus or someone in, Super Sport who would be in the locker room, in the pregame, game drivers meetings, literally help playing the video games with the players on guessing what's what about the opponents, talking to players about emotions, helping the rev up. Why? That makes no sense, right? Because we have a smaller audience. We don't have this massive studio presence. And the reply seems to be along these lines. You guys are the future. Our players prefer you. Our players watch your stuff and like it, so they feel like they have a friend. You're more likely to give us honest responses when we want something back from you. So if Rito Humgeni wants to talk to me about lineouts, I'm actually going to talk to him, and he might have already watched and said, this guy knows about lineouts, as opposed to a journalist hack who has never changed what he says, has received wisdom that never still talks about a fly off in the pocket and he's got to play on the line. Stuff that's bullshit and doesn't relate to the way they play anymore. Doesn't understand how pods actually work. So they kind of pick who they like based on rugby doctrines, but also who their players like. Then you get into the WhatsApp group, and you're not beholden to a boss, so you can do whatever the hell you want. You can say whatever you want. If you want to do something goofy, like have a beard contest, you can put that content on. They're working with whatever the generation is called, players, and that's who the players want. They don't want to talk to the old that's the head writer of the newspaper that no one buys. So yeah, I think that's it. And then also they like social media and they want to multiply it, and so they can leverage us, and we can leverage them. Yeah, but you and I sat in the front row together, and we get to go first question. We're taking over slowly but surely.
Yeah, when I started the season going to a Six Nations game with media access, and I was really disappointed, really, to buy the the press that was there, kind of the traditional media, because there was a lot of traditional, it's Six Nations, it's very old school, and there was traditional media there. And I really felt like the press conference was like the coach was looking around going like, so what are you guys going to ask me? And there was kind of almost no questions. And then one guy asked Matt Sherratt, who was the Wales coach at the time, said, are you going to take the job full on? And he said, no. And then another journalist asked him, like, but are you going to take the job full time? And he went, no. And it was like, well, guys, what are we doing here? Like this and this is it. And the whole thing lasted like 4 minutes. Like in my head, I thought it was like half an hour of the guy getting grilled. And no, it wasn't that at all. And then you get we did the one in Twickenham with Razzie and Sia and Montoya and Contepomi, and there was a content creators there who asked a very content creatory question, which maybe they didn't like, but that content creator got the response they were looking for from it, and they got that bit of content from it, and I assume it must have done okay for them. Um, it it's very noticeable as well which unions are kind of being progressive about it, because there's one union that I shan't name, but people can probably guess which one it is, that are remarkably old-fashioned about it. Like the rule about how you can't film while you're in the stadium. It's like, well, hang on a second. We're YouTubers. What are you expecting us to do while we're here?
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, say, Australia Rugby Union, they're very tight when they're at home, but when they're on the road, they'll suspend that. So in Cape Town at a news conference, it was just me and three or four guys. And I got Fraser McWright to really take me through what is in the open sider's mind when they attack or choose to fall off and move sideways, and how the picture looks in their mind. And it was super interesting, not just to the other journos who would never have gone down that road, but it was actually it was interesting to the media guy from ARU, and it was interesting to Fraser because he stayed around to talk some more with me. And my reflection on that is not to pump myself up so much as to say, when you're inside, when I was embedded with the Stormers, the level of discourse they have and analytics and statistics, and how well briefed the players are on these various portfolios of the game. And you go to a press conference and it was like, so how did you handle the rain? Or was it interesting, how good Artie Savea was? It's so banal that it doesn't even intrigue the players. They're operating on a very different level when they talk about lineouts and scrums and so forth. They would like a question that shows them to be the thinking rugby players they are. So I think that's all in the mix of why I think we're having our good moment.
Yeah, and I think us being fans as well, because the one of the point that I always try and make whenever I talk about this kind of side of things is when I am not a professional analyst, I am not a professional journalist. I am a rugby fan, and being a fan is what motivates what I do, and what is the first and foremost in my mind whenever I make a piece of content. And I think that, like you said, I think rugby players and rugby coaches like speaking to fans, and they also like being asked, like you said, kind of proper questions, not headline grabber questions, not ones where it's kind of a leading question of it's kind of a where the journalist almost goes, "Here's the headline that I'm going to write. What do you think about that?"
Yeah, yes, this is good. That's the way to put it. I've been around enough of them to say that they already write the skeleton of their article 10 minutes into the match. And then they just try to shift it around because they're trying to hit a deadline. We have no deadlines. And if we do have to go quick, we can just speak out of our arse. It's okay. It doesn't matter. We could be funny. We could be drunk. We could do whatever we want. So we don't have that pressure to sculpt an article, create the headline, make the editor be, like it first at oranges, and then just fund and hope the second half doesn't mess up their narrative. And I think everyone knows that. Whereas if I'm saying to Kalen Doris, what's it like to face 16 fed scrums of the box? Like, talk me through that, what that looks like, even as an eighth man. And it was because you got a real emotion out of him in his eyes, and because we can film it, it's like he's talking to me in my camera, in my phone. It's cool, and I think the audience prefers that.
Yeah, I definitely think, and like you said, like the audience isn't consuming it that way either. The players have their preferences of the kind of creators that they want to talk to, but also the audience isn't reading newspapers anymore
No,
either. Like,
no.
and like the kids who are coming through, young people are not paying subscription services for the paid for media. It may be absolutely brilliant stuff. And I know, when I spoke to Kalen on a couple of pods ago, he said there are some fantastic writers writing behind a paywall. Cool. The people aren't paying for it. They just don't want to. So that's kind of why it's going this way. It just means that you've got to have fanatics like us, Harry, who are willing to spend loads of money going to do this off our own backs.
Yeah, it's cool. And in the end, you get funded, and so there's a long gestation period for the content creators, and obviously you and I know the stories behind the stories. Most of them are not willing to go all the way and disband at some point. But there's just enough of us where I think we're going to make it, and form a new genre, not to sound pretentious, of rugby consumers and creators.
Yeah. What's before we move off this? What's the one thing when you were in with the Stormers that completely changed everything? The one thing you're like, I will never look at this man or process again. Now that I know this.
The fact that the people you think are the leaders are often not, and the people that you had no idea they are incredibly persuasive inside a team environment, because it doesn't collate to how good you are at world class level or test level. It's just a collection of 40 or so people, and there are people whose voice mattered a lot, and they speak up and they're respected. Second thing would be the quietness with which they beseech young men to go into violence and give their bodies and put themselves in jeopardy in a way that is quite remarkable. The quiet way that they whisper that to each other, and it's not this beating your chest and slamming your head against a wall with rap music. It's no music, and it's whispers where you're trained to hear, and people that you didn't know would talk, like people that are sort of no names or lesser known. Okay, I'll give you a final one. How wonderful a teammate Sasha Feinberg Mngomezulu is. How not Vinchat he is. Seriously, guys, that's just fake. It's not real. It's fake news that he's in any way a prima donna.
That is a good one. That is a good one. And if you want more good ones, what you could do if you are watching on YouTube is you can sign up for membership. You see the join button that's down below the video. If you hit that for a very, very low price, depending on your region, you get access to bonus weekly videos. This could be outtakes from podcasts. This could be behind the scenes. This could be anything, really. This could be videos that I was worried was going to get a copyright strike, and so I hid them. You can catch them all there. Like I said, there's a new one every single week, and if you pay that very small fee, which I've just realized now that I made a point about people aren't willing to pay for sports coverage anymore. But if you did do that, it helps support the show as well. And like I said, we people like me and Harry, we spend a lot of money doing this. So we much appreciate if you would like to help us out. Harry, last one, 2025, the narrative of the season.
2025 was the year in which the Springboks under Rassie Erasmus became the best team in rugby history at test level. They may go on to be even more the best, but the inflection point between them and the Steve Hansen / Graham Henry 2000 late 2010s to the 2017-18, that era, with 2 World Cups and household names, Ma'a Nonu and Richie McCaw and Kieran Reid and Whitelock and all those cast of characters, was eclipsed by the Erasmus version of the Boks, primarily because there are things that they could not have withstood. The All Blacks, the blowtorch of an 80-minute scrum that was far superior to the scrums that they faced. The fact that the age of parity is here, where teams like Argentina or Ireland are formidably better than they were during the 8 years of the All Blacks supremacy. The fact that we have one comparator, 2015 semifinal in the rain, 2-point win for the All Blacks against teenagers, Pollard, Creel, Dialende, Etzebeth, Fatmel Herba, Kolisi, Detoy. All those players became better players. And then the fact that there's X factor athleticism in the game as a whole, higher jumps, much quicker, much stronger, better physio, better S&C, much better analytics, Moneyball. And the fact that the All Blacks percentages are buoyed by the fact that very few teams were really at the professional level that they needed to be to beat the All Blacks sustainably. Even the Boks at number 2 beat them once under Meyer. And now you have anyone in the top 7, 8 that can humble another team. So it's a more professionally mature sport. Coupled with the fact that Rassie Erasmus has cobbled together a dream team of assistant coaches, all of which could be head coaches in their own right. And he also stands alone as innovative and a prophet, a disciple, as someone who can look at rugby a different way. And the depth is just unparalleled. Therefore, I anoint them the best team in history.
Well, it's fair to say that that conclusion suits you. As a Springboks fan, I have always maintained that I think that the 2015 All Blacks are the greatest ever team, and I think that I actually think that the gap between them and the rest is evidence of that. You know, you may say that the professionalism didn't exist, but they brought it. They went to that level when no one else could, and I think they deserve credit for that.
That's the crux of our disagreement. Is we use the same piece of evidence to support we counter our argument.
I would have said my point in 2025 when I was willing to say if this happens, then I'm willing to switch was Eden Park, and the All Black and the Springboks failed in that game. That's why that was the point where I said, okay, no, they screwed it up. So
Uh, Eden Park of
that's
this year. Eden Park of
yes,
this
Eden
year.
Park this year.
Okay. But what about Wellington of this year?
That's no before the games were played. Everyone said that Eden Park was the one, including you.
Yeah, but we didn't expect that there would be the worst defeat ever in the history of All Blacks. I didn't. I
No,
certainly didn't see that coming.
no, but the Eden Park was the big game. Eden Park was the final,
I
and I
agree.
think
I agree with that. I just think that the reaction to learn. So here's what it is. I think that these particular blocks are such learning. They're like a reptile back in the mists of time when there was evolutionary who learned quick. They learned lessons quicker than all the other competing animals. So like to go from Eden Park, Artie Savea on the goal line, a marginal steal, shake it off. The next week, I've never seen anyone do that to the All Blacks.
well, no, but clearly no one has. I think it's a factual statement to say that no one has ever done that to the All Blacks. Does it not suggest though? Because the other thing that changed between the two tests was the team completely changed, and I
Yeah.
think that does that mean that Razzie got it wrong? That Razzie in the
Yes.
Eden Park test went with the old guard, and in a funny way, that Eden Park test was the end of the old guard, and now we are really in the new Springboks since that game.
Yes, I think that the player cores, if you take them side by side of 2015 and the now box, are really close. Even a proud New Zealander, we go back and forth now. We kind of have an 8-7 team or 7-8 team. If we go into reserves, it's still really close. It's just really close. So I think everyone agrees the player core and even the weakest player in the 23, which I think is super important, is important. It's the quality of the coaching that I think the ability of Rassi Erasmus better than Steve Hansen at having to shift because I don't know if Steve Hansen ever had to do that. I this is where the whole parity argument comes in, which is difficult. So we'll never prove it. I defer to the fact that your argument is sound logically, and I cannot really refute it. I can just make my pitch, and you can decide. But I get your point. Is they were that much above because they were that much better. I say they were that much above because the field was weaker. And the both things are supported by the same
Well,
evidence.
the modern Springboks are getting to that kind of point. I mean, post Ellis Park obviously is kind of the big thing that stands out as the freak event, and it was a freak event. And I know that you've spoken to Springbok players since and said, actually, if you ask us, kind of the best rugby that we played all year, first 20 minutes at Ellis Park was kind of it.
Yes.
But it, that kind of event again is another sort of thing that I don't recall that happening to the 2015 All Blacks. Or, like there was games like they played
That's
against
true.
Ireland in Dublin and they went 21-0 down in the first half, but they won the game in with a retaken conversion in overtime, but they
Yeah,
won the game. But kind of since that Wellington game at least, South Africa have kind of gone to that level of no, okay, there is clear daylight now. There's always one. It's a bit like in boxing where there's always one contender that you haven't fought yet.
yeah,
You haven't fought this now good England. Yes, in 2024 you played England in Twickenham and beat them in their own patch. So you could say, yeah, we have played them, but I think everyone would agree that England have changed and upgraded significantly since that moment. So you
that's
face them
fair.
next year in South Africa. But that's
Yeah,
always going to be, you're never going to play everybody in the same year. So that's a bit harsh to hold that against you.
yeah,
But the kind of that aside, can't really see anybody being even near the same level. And I think like France, for example, there was a moment where everyone thought France, the game in Paris should have been the thing where it was that, and it turned out not to be. And now, certainly for me, I bristle a little bit when people talk about France's depth compared to the Springboks, because Galtier doesn't know how to create depth in the same way that Razzie does, and so now I'm struggling to see like who actually can take on the Springboks to the point where this greatest rivalry tour next year. I'm a little bit worried about it. I don't see
Yeah.
How you because you'd think that like law of averages, the way that sport goes, if you're playing against each other 4 times, the All Blacks will probably win one, just some way, somehow. A dodgy referee call, a red card, an injury in the rain, that kind of thing. It happens. But I don't see how Razors All Blacks take a game off the Springboks at the moment.
Yeah. And by the way, I respect your argument. And as a host of your show, I'd be rude for me to come on and kick chairs. I actually see the points you're making and I understand them. I'm just more of the Birch Jackman school of thought here, which is I don't think those All Blacks ever faced a bomb squad quite the way the Box can.
I
And
agree.
so it's innovations by Rassie, even Ariel with Kanan Moody, Ethan Hooker, the size of backs like Andre Esazen that might have made people like Conrad Smith look small and maybe not as quick sometimes. I think the game got more athletic, and it's very difficult to go back even 10 years and monitor that in a very young professional sport. But I think we're looking at some just super athletes now. And so that's difficult. By the way, I think of all the teams you just spoke of, I do worry about England because England can put a Lions level front row on at minute 60. And I think you have to do that nowadays.
Yeah. I will say that I don't want people to misinterpret my argument as I think that the 2015 All Blacks would beat the 2025 Springboks. I think that athletically, tactically, skills wise, the game has moved on to such an extent that I do think that the 2015 All Blacks could be competitive at tier one level currently just because their players were that good. But I think that, like you said, I don't think that they could come up against the quality of athletes that the Springboks have. I think you were right. I don't think that they ever did in that era. And I think if the two sides were to face, I do think that the 2025 Springboks would have too much for them for sure. It would be interesting to see Dan Carter against Sasha because there is a comparison there that
Yeah.
I think we're all waiting of when can we actually make this comparison, because I do think it is too early because I think you have to have the respect for Dan Carter up to what he achieved. I do think it is
Yeah.
too early to say who is better between him and Sasha, but at some point, unless Sasha gets a bad injury, that conversation is going to come up.
I think that's right. I've always sort of used 50 caps as where we start talking about stuff. And before that, it's all on the promise. It's all on the projection. Sasha looks like he could do amazing things for a long time, but let's see him do it.
Yeah, I will say as well that I am still open-minded to change. I am not saying because Eden Park happens, that's my mind made up forever. If there will be another judgment point in a minute, which I may change my mind again. And I do fully see that there is an argument. And your argument saying that I think it is this way, I think all of the points that you made are valid. And if someone listens to both sides and says, no, I agree with Harry, I'm completely fine with that because I do I think it was a debate already, and I think 2025 has only made it closer.
Yeah, fair enough.
Anyway, if you've enjoyed the show and you've gotten all the way to the end and you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing or sharing this video or podcast. A link with a friend if you think that they might enjoy it. I hope you found it, if nothing else, thought-provoking. If you have, leave those thoughts in the comments section down below. Enjoy your rugby, and I hope that everybody's team in 2026 wins. Cheers.